The emergency board meeting at Mason Logistics had descended into shouting. Executives argued over flashing graphs and charts showing $40 million in projected losses. Enough! CEO Elizabeth Parker slammed her fist on the table, silencing the room. I need solutions, not excuses. The air was thick with tension when Frank Reynolds, the maintenance man no one ever noticed, slipped quietly into room to fix the thermostat. As he glanced at the sprawling route map on the main screen, his trained eyes caught something everyone else missed. He muttered under his breath, "That's backward." Elizabeth's head snapped up. "What did you say?" Startled, Frank froze. Every executive stared at him. Ma'am, your distribution centers, they're connected backward. That's why your routes keep collapsing." The room fell utterly silent. Elizabeth blinked in disbelief, then motioned for him to explain. And that's how Invisible Man, one who mopped their floors and fixed their lights, pointed out what the entire board of analysts and strategists had failed to see. 3 days earlier, Frank's alarm buzzed at 5:30 a.m. His small apartment was dark, quiet except for the hum of the old refrigerator. He moved carefully through his morning routine. Toast with peanut butter, sliced apples, and a packed lunch for his 9-year-old daughter, Sophie. The kitchen light flickered again, another repair he'd fix someday. Frank checked Sophie's homework, then gently braided her chestnut hair, his rough hand surprisingly tender. "Perfect," he whispered. It meant more than hair. It meant stability, survival, and love after 7 years of doing it all alone since Maria, his wife, died giving birth. The framed photo of her smiled from the bookshelf. "Did you pack my inhaler, Dad?" Sophie asked, adjusting her red glasses. "Right here," he said, patting his pocket. "And your teacher has the backup." He'd never forgotten the night. He almost lost her to an asthma attack. On the counter sat his old engineering textbook. Open to diagrams he studied every night after Sophie went to bed. He had once been 3 semesters from a degree, before life forced him to choose diapers over diplomas. After 3 bus rides, Frank arrived at Mason Logistics, a sleek empire of glass and steel. He changed into his gray uniform in the basement locker room, where the smell of bleach and metal lingered. His co-worker Ted nodded, and together they moved in silent rhythm. Maintenance men invisible in a world that never saw them. Executives in tailored suits swept past without acknowledgement. Frank knew the unspoken rules: when to vanish, which halls to avoid, which restrooms needed cleaning after the morning coffee rush. That morning, Elizabeth Parker's arrival sent ripples through the building. At 38, she was composed, commanding, her charcoal suit crisp, her auburn hair twisted into a severe bun. When her Mercedes stopped at the front, Frank was polishing the lobby tiles she was about to walk on. As she entered, juggling her coffee and leather portfolio, a few papers slipped. Frank immediately stooped to help. He noticed the diagrams, routing models. His eyes caught a minor but crucial flaw. "Ma'am, I think there's an inconsistency in—" "Thank you," interrupted her assistant, taking the papers before he could finish. "Ms. Parker has a call with Tokyo." Frank returned to mopping as the elevator doors closed. She hadn't even looked at him. That was the order of things. Those who kept the company running unseen, and those who led it without ever knowing how. Throughout the day, Frank fixed lights, unclogged drains, replaced filters, always listening. He heard executives debating problems they couldn't solve. "The Asian hubs are lagging 60% behind Europe," one said in frustration. Frank, tightening a vent screw, connected the pieces in his head. The issue wasn't regional. It was structural. The system itself was backwards. That evening, Frank picked up Sophie from after-school care. Her eyes lit up when she saw him. Home transformed into warmth and color as they worked on her science project about efficient systems. She spread string across a poster board to represent delivery routes. "See, Dad? If you connect these differently, it moves faster," she said, her eyes gleaming. "That's right," Frank said, smiling. "You've got a real engineer's mind." "I get it from you," Sophie said proudly. "My teacher says to always speak up when I know the answer. You should too, Dad." Her words lingered long after she fell asleep. The next day, while changing air filters above the executive boardroom, Frank overheard a panicked discussion. If we don't fix this by Monday, we're down $40 million, the CFO warned. Restructure Europe? Another suggested. Minimal improvement, came the frustrated reply. We're missing something fundamental. Frank froze. He knew exactly what it was. During lunch, he sketched a solution on a napkin, redesigning the entire routing network from distribution centers outward. It was clear, elegant, efficient, but then doubt crept in. He was just maintenance. No one would listen. Then Sophie's text arrived. Math problem. Can I call? When she did, she said, Mr. Jackson says if you know the answer, you should say it, even if you're scared. Frank stared at the napkin, out of the mouths of babes. That weekend, the crisis escalated. Clients threatened to cancel million-dollar contracts. Frank was called for overtime to keep the building running, as executives worked around the clock. He cleaned quietly, listening, realizing his napkin might actually save them. He finally approached Elizabeth's assistant in the hallway. Sir, I think this could help. He unfolded the napkin, heart pounding. Thanks, the assistant said dismissively, slipping it into a folder and straight into the trash. That night, as Frank emptied bins, he saw Elizabeth alone in her office, her posture weary, her reflection in the glass strained. She looked human for the first time, lonely, burdened. He almost knocked on her door, but fear won. Sunday morning, fate intervened. Sophie woke wheezing. It was mild, but enough to keep Frank from leaving her. With no sitter, he brought her to work and set her up in the break room. Stay here, honey. Use your inhaler if you need it. Minutes later, Elizabeth walked in for coffee and found Sophie struggling to breathe. Hey there, she said, dropping her executive mask. Let me help. She expertly adjusted the inhaler and comforted the frightened child. When Frank rushed in breathless, he froze at the sight, his daughter calm, the CO kneeling beside her. Your daughter's all right, Elizabeth said gently. She's a brave one. She fixed my inhaler. Sophie beamed. I told her about your drawing that fixes her company's trucks. Elizabeth's expression sharpened. Drawing? Frank flushed. It was just an idea, nothing official. Elizabeth's voice softened, but her eyes gleamed. I'd like to see it. They searched, but the napkin was gone. Elizabeth turned back to him. Could you recreate it? That night, Frank sat at the kitchen table, Sophie watching as he redrew the system carefully. They're thinking from headquarters outward, he explained, but it should be from the warehouses inward, like water flowing to the lowest point, Sophie said. Frank smiled. Exactly. But after she went to bed, he sat staring at the drawing, doubt returning. What if I'm wrong? He whispered. Monday morning, his hands trembled as he stood before the most powerful people in Mason Logistics. Elizabeth had insisted he presented himself. When he said, Your system is backward, the silence was deafening. The COO sneered. And you're logistics expert now. Let him speak, Elizabeth ordered. Frank pointed at the screen. Your routes focus on geography, not load efficiency. You're sending half-empty trucks just because they're local. If you reroute by load type, you'll save time, money, and fuel. The COO scoffed, but Elizabeth stepped closer, studying the diagram. Run a simulation on the Northwest Corridor. When the data came in, the results spoke for themselves. Efficiency up 15%, empty miles down 20%, savings climbing every minute. Elizabeth turned to Frank, her professional composure cracking into a genuine smile. When you're right, she whispered. You're right. That moment marked a turning point. Not just for Mason Logistics, but for every unseen person who ever had an idea worth hearing. Elijah burst through the curtain of rain, following the trembling twins who could barely keep up with his long strides. His boots sank into the muddy path as thunder cracked above, the storm seeming to echo the chaos ahead. Where is she? He shouted over the howling wind. This way. Please hurry, one of the girls sobbed. Their voices broke with fear and cold. When they reached the old shack at the edge of the woods, Elijah froze. The door was hanging by one hinge, splattered with something darker than mud. Inside, the air was thick with a metallic scent of blood. On the creaky wooden floor lay their mother, motionless, her dress torn, her pulse faint but still there. Elijah's chest tightened. He dropped to his knees, pressing his fingers against her neck. "She's alive," he whispered. "But barely." He looked around for anything to stop the bleeding. Old sheets, a towel, anything, and tore strips from his own shirt. He wrapped her wounds as best he could, trying to ignore the anger boiling inside him. "Who did this?" he asked, his voice trembling with controlled fury. "The men from the tavern." One twin answered between sobs. "Mama told them to leave when they were fighting. They hit her." Elijah clenched his fists. He knew those men, cruel, drunk troublemakers who thought no one would ever stand up to them. "Stay with your mother," he told the girls. "Don't move." He stormed back into the rain, his shadow swallowed by lightning. The tavern lights flickered through the downpour. Inside, laughter and curses mixed with the clinking of bottles. Elijah slammed open the door, every eye turning toward him. His soaked figure stood framed in the doorway, rainwater pooling beneath his boots. "You think you can beat a woman and walk free?" His voice was cold, lethal. The biggest of the men, Burke, a brute with scarred knuckles, sneered. "What's it to you, preacher boy?" "It's to me now." The room went silent before Burke lunged forward, swinging. Elijah dodged, his fist connecting with the man's jaw. The fight was brutal. Tables splintered, bottles shattered, and men flew across the room. Years of quiet suffering, guilt, and grief erupted in Elijah that night. When it was over, Burke lay groaning on the floor, the others crawling away. Elijah stood over them, chest heaving, eyes burning. "If she dies," he said slowly, "pray the storm finds you before I do." He walked out into the rain, without looking back. By the time Elijah returned to the cabin, dawn was breaking. The storm had softened into a mist. The world washed clean but heavy with what had happened. He knelt beside the woman. Her breathing was shallow but steady. "She's going to live," one twin whispered. Elijah nodded, relief flooding through him. He gathered the girls close, his voice breaking for the first time that night. "You're safe now. No one's ever going to hurt her again." He stayed until morning, helping the local doctor who arrived later patch her wounds. When the sun rose, casting a golden glow through the broken window, Elijah finally stood to leave. The older twin caught his hand. "Mister," she said softly, "you saved us." "Why?" He looked down at her tear-streaked face, her tiny trembling fingers. "Because once," he said quietly, "no one came when I called for help." She hugged him, wordless. Weeks later, the story spread through town. How Elijah Reed, the quiet man who lived alone by the river, had faced down 3 armed drunks to save a dying woman and her children. Some called him a fool. Others called him a hero. But Elijah didn't care what anyone called him. For the first time since his wife and son had died in a car crash 2 years earlier, he felt something stir inside, not grief, but purpose. He helped rebuild their cabin, taught the twins how to fish, and made sure the woman, Mary, never went hungry again. When the first snow of winter fell, Elijah stood by the river, listening to the wind hum through the trees. Behind him, laughter rang out, the girls playing, Mary calling them in for supper. For the first time in a long, lonely stretch of years, Elijah Reed smiled. The storm that once mirrored his pain had finally washed something clean, his heart. And somewhere deep inside, he knew fate hadn't sent those twins to his door by accident. It had sent them to save him too.